as in my... Okay, alright. Oh, did I not?
We play that? Okay.
Way off.
Thank you.
I had a really good idea that I was about to make.
Hello, primary school teacher with it. Apologies for the flustered demeanour. Less than 45 minutes ago I was serving people pizza. So, yes, welcome one, welcome all to the first ordinary meeting of the 168th session of the Literary and Scientific Society of Queen's University, Belfast. Literary for short. Yes, so for our freshers here, if there are any, I can see a few, some, yes. We, as a society, started in 1850 as a paper reading society, and then we decided that papers are decidedly very last century, so we decided to go into competitive debating. We've been reinstituted as a society for about 7 years, having been banned for about 40? No, not 40, about 35 now, because became much more rabulous in their late 60s, early 70s. What do you want, Craig?
What was the actual final straw that got us banned?
One of my predecessors decided that he would come and chair debate minus on everything.
The clue.
On a point of information,
Yes, sir.
am I right in saying that said former president is now a member of the Legislative Assembly?
I can neither confirm nor deny it. Members of our legislature. Yes, so welcome to the Literific. At this point, I'd usually make some sort of plan about us being master debaters, but that's probably a bit out of taste. So we'll move on to the ordinary business, private members' business to begin with. Ms. Stratford.
Yes, President, you may remember that approximately 11 months ago.
I remember to the day.
Yes, I was fined for swearing, and because I'm obviously a very busy young professional, I didn't bother to bring you my fine. So today, I've bought you a bottle of port.
Thank you very much. And private business from our secretary, Mr. Willoughby Whitehurst.
Mr. President, on the subject of swearing, could you please go through in alphabetical order all the words that have been unacceptable?
Lib Dem. Trotskyites. I don't know.
On your
I mean, Lib Dem pretty much encompasses it all for me. Any other private members' business? Yes, Mr. Calvin Black.
I'd just like to take this opportunity to point out the microphone over there, which some people may have noticed. That's there because all the debates are recorded and then uploaded onto iTunes and more generally the internet for your listening pleasure. It's always good just to remind people of that at the beginning of the year so you know it's there. So if you want to listen to any of the debates you hear throughout the year or any of them that have been recorded over the past 2.5, I think, there'll be links on the website that you can find again at your leisure. So just be aware of that.
Fantastic, which basically means that if you want to speak at any point throughout the year, you might have a listenership in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia or something like that. Great. Yes, Mr. Dr. Craig Miller, MF, DFS sale 50% off.
The Times debate competition.
There's Times debating competition. Yes. Yeah, this is external business, but I'll get to the reason why it's being addressed to me later. The Irish Times is the Island of Ireland's most prestigious debating competition. Definitely way better than the Irish Mace. Way better. That's from a totally unbiased perspective. Yes, if anyone is interested, both new members or old, please come speak to me, myself, Mr. Robbie Whitehurst, any of our council members. I believe the team fees are €75 each, but they will be heavily subsidised with us. I can see our former treasurer grimacing at the prospect of us spending money on anything. But anyway, yes. Any other private members of business before I move on to the President's questions? No, President's questions then. Any questions for me? I just like talking about me.
Someone's got to do it.
Would the President, in inform the House what he had for breakfast this morning.
Technically, I had a little bit of a kebab pizza that I saved from last night, but I don't count that as one of my 5 a day. So I technically had a full fry at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So yeah, that's it. Very, very healthy. Anything else? Mr. Finley again.
On a less customary but more serious note, would the President join me in welcoming our new members, human and feline, to the Society?
Yes, welcome.
And to anyone who is not a new member, to encourage them vigorously to join us.
Welcome one and all. This is the first time I believe that we have had a membership consisting of more than one species. So there's a first for everything.
Where are they?
Where are they?
Don't point at Dr. Fair enough. So if you want to bring yourselves along as a member, or bring, I don't know, your dog, or just the more species the better.
Or your local
yeah. I noticed you pointed at Dr. Craig Miller there as if he's a different species, which I think is unfair.
You did just say that you could bring your local Craig to a debate, and that would count.
And leave them there.
I think that's an invasive species, to be fair.
Can we make America great again?
We, as a collective, yes, because nothing we can do with can. Without a can, actually.
Do you like Skittles?
Do you like Not this. I'm not getting it. I'll do the membership cards before I move on to our minutes from the last session. What?
Does Hillary have a
No, not you. No. You. Our current tech officer, Mr. Chris Springs.
What does Mr. President think of Tim Farron's barnstorming speech at the Brecon conference?
I mean, I had all the gusto of like an Anglican minister at a Sunday school. I'm sorry, does anyone else have an opinion on the Right Honourable Member Tim Farron?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I talked about the Lizzie once.
Okay, not that bad. Okay. Let him out that one. Anything else?
Does on the honourable member for wherever Tim Farron's MP for?
Baronet?
What?
Begins with D.
Irrelevant. Go ahead.
Forstable. Is it just me that thinks he should be presenting something on CITV?
That's totally fair. Moving on to membership cards, I believe. Yes. Nobody's going to tell me off for it. So, honorary life membership cards. We have a couple of members in the room who have served the society very well in the past. They serve the society very well, but just by virtue of being members. So I would like to present them to those honorary life members tonight. Namely of which begin with Miss Sophie Stratford. That's not well done. Yeah, short sentence. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Following on from that, our next honorary life membership card goes to Mr. Jonathan Flynn. Well, can I have it, please? No, you can't.
Now.
Our next presenter to Mr. Calvin Black. And finally, present to Miss Tara Priyaka.
Oh, does the cat get one?
It should. Thank you.
Yeah, and that concludes private government business. I just remembered I was supposed to ask if you have any mini
Have you got
meetings or
any?
anything.
My eyes are starting to
I mean,
water.
Tim Farron apparently is a debate in itself. Does anyone have any small issues they would like to present to the House? as private member of business. Yes, you, Mr. Campbell.
I'd like to know the House's opinion on whether they think Corbyn's victory is assured at this point. With only a few days to go until the results.
Anyone?
Yeah, it is.
I think we're all in agreement on that.
It just means 20 more years of Tory.
No one want to rail Owen Smith for being so ridiculously uncharismatic.
I like him because he wants a second referendum. That's what this side wants. Of course.
In fairness, he has the same glasses as me, so his opinion can't be that bad. Yes.
Also wet.
Well, yeah, but minuses and positives, minuses and positives. Moving on to our minutes that from the last debate, which was a special debate for the EU referendum, this House would leave the European Union, or the other way around, yes, it's the other way around. This House would remain in the European Union. Presented by Mr. Robbie Whiter.
Good evening, one and all. Hope we're all very well. As Benjamin said, I am Mr. Rob Whitehurst. No, you don't have to call me Mr., but that would make me smile. As Benjamin said, I get up at the start of every meeting, and it's my job to record what is said during the debates. So if you stand up here and you make, an enthralling speech, it's all very good. But if you say something even slightly stupid, it will be immortalised for all eternity. I'll be watching you. But anyway. The EU referendum special debate of the Literific took place on the 8th of June 2016 in the Senate room and was attended by 35 members. Private members' business was heard from Mr. Andrew Hanneman, who claimed the Democrats putting their faith in Hillary Clinton to be their presidential candidate ensured that by the end of the year we would all have to get very used to the sound of President Trump. Mr. Craig Miller asserted that we should all instead put our faith in independent candidate Gary WTF is Aleppo Johnson.
Oh, Syria.
Oh my God. Meanwhile, Mr. Richard Gallagher decried the growingly popular sentiment of anyone but Hillary. Meanwhile, Mr. Johnny Finlay wished to know Vermin Supreme's availability. And finally, Mr. Finbar Rogers claimed that Donald Trump has less presidential spunk about him than Monica Lewinsky's dress. We're starting early. Moving on, in light of a spate of recent much-loved celebrity deaths, Mr. Finlay put forward a motion whereby no one else should die in the year of 2016. In response, Mr. Rogers sentenced death to death, and Mr. Ryan Neal quoted some Chaucer. Without further ado, President Murphy announced the evening's motion, this House would remain in the EU. Opening for the proposition was former Literific President Adam Kidd, who claimed that the power of the United Kingdom was more important than its sovereignty. He claimed though that a united and strong European Union, Russian President and notorious Donald Trump sympathiser Vladimir Putin would run roughshod over the continent. He claimed that for the EU to be truly socially liberal, that the UK must remain as an invaluable bridge between the EU and NATO. He concluded by saying that we already have monetary power and that ever-helpful Lady Thatcher ensured that we already have relatively strong sovereignty. Opening for the opposition was Mr. Jonathan Finlay. He went on a tirade against EU policy, stating that the common agricultural policy only served to help the bigwigs and those pesky shrews in Brussels were to appropriate British traditions as their own. He claimed that Britain was the original inspiration for and source of equality and freedom in Europe, that the UK and EU were fundamentally at odds, and concluded by asking the proposition that if Lady Thatcher secured us such a wonderful deal, then why were we leaving? Did you know something that we didn't at the time? Continue with the proposition. Continuing with the proposition was Mr. Cormac Manning. He himself claimed that he was a successful example of an EU migrant, being from Cork. He lambasted the proposition for holding on to their archaic views of sovereignty and asserted that in the 21st century, true sovereignty and power comes from working together. He asked the House if they would be happy to see huge corporations bullying states in 2016 and that we need to band together to combat the corrupt banking system. He concluded by saying that we've been given the opportunity to write our future within the EU and we shouldn't throw it away. The second speaker of the opposition was Dr. Craig Miller. He rallied against the EU's economic policies, claiming that all countries in the Union must agree wholeheartedly for them to work, which was an impossible task. He accused the proposition of wanting to be America's puppet, and that if we truly wanted to stand up to Russia, we should look to NATO rather than the EU. He said the claim of the EU helping small businesses was laughable, and that the Union seeks only to help the big businesses and corporations who have MEPs on their payroll. Speaking thoroughly for proposition was Mr. Stefan Ivanitsky. He painted a picture for the House whereby a non-EU Britain's economy would be held up exclusively by Game of Thrones and Greggs the Bakers, and where we would be regularly bullied on the world stage by the likes of Slovenia. The common market gives us a huge global power, he claimed, and that workers within the union were protected from capitalist greed. Thirdly for the opposition was DUP councillor for Castlereagh South, Nathan Anderson. He claimed he asked the House if any of them really knew what was going on in Brussels. He claimed that the EU brings the worst of the left and the right together, and that in the Union, small businesses were of no value compared to corporations fueled by the self-interest of the Eurocrats. He claimed that further assimilation into the EU would follow if we remained, and that this was a clear example of conformity rather than collusion. Concluding for the proposition was Mr. Finbar Rogers. He began by defending David Cameron, saying that he is the Prime Minister we need to guide us into a Remain victory and beyond. He concluded by raising the question of what would happen to the Irish border if we upheaved a 30-year status quo. And finally, concluding for the opposition was Mr. Chris Spratt, who claimed that the EU was stuck in Napoleonic times and the UK had surpassed them long ago. However, it was at this point that Mr. Spratt confessed his undying love for the European Union, and that, in reality, they would be better off without the trailing leg of the United Kingdom. He labelled the UK as being the toxic influence upon the Union, and, although we may well lose our economic power and security, we have a moral obligation to let the EU fly free and prosper on its own. He concluded with a frankly beautiful statement of, if you love something, let it go. Questions were heard from Mr. Robert Murtagh, David Coulter, Ryan Neal, Peter Gray and Liam McManus. An opinion vote was taken before the debate based on the personal opinion of the House on the motion this House would remain in the EU, which read 14 ayes, 7 nays and 3 abstentions. After the debate, a casting vote based on Speaker's performance was taken, which read 8 ayes, 8 nays and 7 abstentions. May I take the minutes as read? Thank you.
I just suddenly remembered that we have not one but 2 elections to announce tonight. Normally at this time of year we would call the election for a first year representative, someone who's a fresher and wants to be representative of their year group on the council. It's not a very daunting position. Pretty much just help out and add your opinion and represent your cohort on the council. So that we will have a vote for that probably not next week.
We'll not usually do a council.
Yes, sorry, the first year position is sort of appointed. Sorry, we're supposed to say she. Anyway, yes, so that position is appointed. Interviews will be from basically now for that. So if you'd like to, if you would be interested in that position, by all means email me or the secretary at president@littlerific.org or secretary@littlerific.org, and we have our own website, which is really cool. The other position is for external convener, which is elected. We weren't really expected to have this election, but there we have it. Basically, unfortunately, due to some terrible unforeseen circumstances, the external convener role is now vacant. This involves coordinating with other universities, sending teams to other universities for inter-varsity debates, organising teams for the Irish Times competition and the Irish Mace, organising RIV, that is mostly organised. Whoever gets selected to that position can thank me for that. Anyway, so the election for that position will be a fortnight from now, probably like 3 weeks from now, I'd say. 3 weeks from now? No, 3 weeks from now. Don't keep nodding and like, as if you don't know. We'll say 3 weeks from now then.
Constitutionally, you have to have a fortnight, so 3 weeks is fine.
The constitutional guru here.
Based on the description there, I don't think anyone's going to really want to volunteer. So when does the conscription happen?
By the point of the sword, which will be when we get a sword.
That's how.
When we get a sword. Yeah. Is there a nomination?
You're talking to me about getting paid. I'll give it to you in the will of the
Well,
society.
you nominate yourself, and you need one other person to nominate you for the position as well. You need to email me and have the person who has nominated you for that position. Preferably they should email for that. Yeah.
When do nominations close?
Nominations will close a week from today. Well, actually, no, because that's probably not long. Fortnight from today. So a fortnight from today will be the nominations will close for this position.
Briefly, Mr. Cappers.
Yes, moving on to the debates. So, the debate tonight is this House will hold a second European Union referendum. Yeah, I will explain the rules of the British Parliament.
Ben.
Usually, this House is governed by the rules of British parliamentary debating. So, for anyone who's not familiar with those rules, basically means that everybody on either side of the table gets a fancy name. So, first, second, third speaker of the proposition are Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and closing proposition or closing government. The opposition are the Leader of the Opposition, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and closing opposition. Speeches are 7 minutes long, not 8 minutes long. Yeah, it's okay if it's any less than that, but preferably 7 minutes long. I will ring the first and last minute of your speaking time are protected, in which nobody can raise a point of information. The middle 5 minutes, people can raise points of information, stand up and say, at that point serve. There's many styles in which they can do that. You can do the little teapot and go on that point serve, or you can do the trendy approach, which is like, kind of like that. I don't know why they do that. But yeah, so you can raise points of information, you politely stand up and ask me. You can raise a question about a person's speech or just interject with a point. It's up to them whether they accept it or not. So if they tell you to sit down, just oblige and we'll let them get on with their speech. We don't have too many points of information like in close succession after each other. It's called barking. It's highly discouraged because you're seriously disrupting the flow of the speaker's speech. So, anything else than that? Yeah, that's it. Yes, sir, there's a question for you?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask, if you take a point of information, do you get extra time then afterwards, or does it?
The clock continues running, so it doesn't. The clock continues running, so it does. So, again, you have the first minute of your speech and the last minute protected. Inside of that, no one's allowed to make a point of information. So, yeah, if anyone's clear with the rules, we'll get on with the debate then.
Yeah, fine. At last.
Speaking for the government, Prime Minister, Mr. Jeannie Ham.
Right, so I'm going to have, I know, possibly an interesting speech, depends how many people fall asleep. Basically, I'm going to say that we should have a second referendum because, to be honest, nobody knows what's happening. That's why, and that's the thrust of my speech. For example, I guess, for the purpose of this debate, my predecessor, Theresa May, has been saying Brexit means Brexit. And then the next day, Brexit means Brexit, and then the next week, Brexit means Brexit, and then she slides off Ian Duncan Smith for saying something he doesn't like, and then Brexit means Brexit again. But I'm talking about, what does Brexit mean? Really, what does it mean? Because nobody really knows. We all voted for this thing that is Brexit, that's leaving the European Union, but nobody really knows what that actually means. So the the point of this debate, this speech is going to be, well, we should have a second referendum once we know what that means, because there's so many different outcomes that it could be that we can possibly know what we were really voting for, and it could actually happen that what we end up getting out of Brexit, in terms of negotiations and deal or whatever, means that, well, we didn't get what the voters wanted, and actually we don't know what the voters wanted because they didn't say, we want to leave the European Union because of X, Y, and Z. It said, we want to leave the European Union, or whatever the actual wording was. You can criticise me for that, I guess. So, really, I'm going to start by sort of explaining the sort of general situation, and then go into sort of my arguments. I'm going to refer to examples where other countries have done a second referendum based on EU treaties, and why the sort of second referendums are justifiable because of clarification. And then I'm sort of just going to talk about some other stuff whenever I think about it. I might go into my anecdote if I need more time. So First one's explaining, right, Article 50. We're assuming Article 50 has not been triggered at the moment. And basically, it's probably not going to be triggered until 2017 due to many, many reasons, but it's not the purpose of the debate. So, what it means is, we don't really know what our sort of deal would be with the EU referendum because Article 50 hasn't been triggered. But we have some sort of idea of what might happen if we ask for certain things. For example, we asked for, we're thinking of having access to the single market. Where, well, we have an idea that we probably would have to accept free movement people from that. I mean, the only country that said there might be negotiation is Sweden, and I don't know Sweden's negotiating power in the EU, but they're one nation and any other nation can just veto what they say or whatever. So, and you have people like Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU Commission President, has said that free movement people comes with access to the single market. Germany and France said that this issue is non-negotiable. So, pretty much think if you want sort of a soft Brexit idea where we have sort of single market, then therefore we're going to get immigration. And an interesting point, which based on that immigration, no, I do not think the point, is that one of the main reasons why people voted for to leave the EU was based on immigration. I mean, there's a polling data which suggests this. Lord Ashcroft polling did a polling of 12,000 people, roughly, and 1/3 of respondents said that it was the main reason for them voting, and around 40% said it was one of the main reasons. So, considering the margin that the Brexit vote had of, it was 4% sway, that you can imagine some people thinking, well, we're not going to get restrictions on immigration based on leaving the EU, we get this. And therefore, that is considerable material consideration, which would change the environment in which, where you consider voting to stay within the EU or not.
Thank you, member, for giving way. Would he agree with me that it's very difficult to respect the integrity of the proposition if they seem to be arguing for a second referendum only if the result is a foregone conclusion?
What do you mean by the fact that the result's a foregone conclusion? Because, I'm not saying that it is a foregone conclusion or not. What I'm saying is that we should have a second referendum because we don't know, and actually I'm taking you through one example, one situation that happened, and I'm actually going to talk about another situation just after this, about how, still we will get in a situation where, upon clarification, we probably should have a second referendum because, well, we don't know. And so, I'm going to go on to that second one now, which is a hard Brexit, and that is that we just completely pull out of the EU, lol, and also that, we're not accessing the single market or whatever. The thing is, the Leave campaign wasn't really clear on what their stance was on that. Some of them said let's have a hard Brexit, some of them said let's have a soft Brexit, some of them flip-flopped all the time, and it's not going to go on like puns anymore with that. Okay. So, no one actually knows. No, I don't accept. And so, the thing is, do they really have a mandate to say hard Brexit or soft Brexit? Therefore, surely if a hard Brexit happens, or even the soft Brexit happens, there should be a referendum because there's no actual mandate on what type of Brexit it was. Therefore, once we once we actually know that, then should we have a second referendum? Yes, because there's been changed circumstances, which gets me on to my second point, which is examples of other countries. So Denmark and the Republic of Ireland are two countries which have, on 3 occasions, the Republic of Ireland twice, have had two referendums on single treaties. So the most famous one was Republic of Ireland initially rejecting the Lisbon Treaty and then accepting it. And what happened was both countries had some concerns about what these treaties meant. And similar to the Leave campaign in Brexit, the No campaign for both of them raised various issues. One of them was, sovereignty was for Denmark, Republic of Ireland raised the issue of abortion because that wasn't clarified. Upon clarification of saying that given assurances that certain things wouldn't be affected, then they had a second referendum and it turned into a yes. If it happened in the Brexit case, who knows if it would be overturned or not, but what it was is both of them had material change in considerations as to what signing those treaties would mean. Similarly, for Brexit, to leave or to stay, there's a change in material considerations once we know if it's a hard Brexit or soft Brexit or whatever other bits in between. And therefore, you should vote to have a second referendum, because if you think you really know what Brexit means, you don't, and we should have a second referendum, because we have no clue what it means. Vote for not knowing. Thank you.
The House now recognises the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. John Finlay.
Well, I would like to congratulate the Prime Minister on his defection to the opposition. That really was the best speech I could have given against the chaos that holding referenda wreaks in a parliamentary democracy. Tonight, the opposition is going to make 3 arguments. I am going to set out why we shouldn't have referenda in the first place. They are an abstract principle. They are a fantasy. They are an idea based only on theory rather than a proper programme for governing. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is going to argue that if we must have a referendum, then there must be very strict criteria for holding a second one, which have not been met. And the closing speaker for the opposition, who I think might be referred to as the opposition chief whip, will argue that even if we meet those criteria, why should we bother? Get over it. We've already had one. It was a mistake. Let's just not let it happen again. So, parliamentary democracy versus referenda. Referenda give democracy a bad name. They produce unstable governments with one-sentence manifestos. I don't know how many of you have ever struggled through a party's general election manifesto. It doesn't say a great deal, but at least has a lot of pages, and a lot of words, and a lot of pictures. It generally consists of more than yes. Because that's what our current government's manifesto is. That's their programme for government. All they know is that they have to leave the European Union. They don't have any other commitments. And that people have been talking about this as if we've had an election. People have been talking about Theresa May and her new cabinet as if it's a new government. It's not actually. It's a continuation of the mandate that David Cameron has, but everyone thinks of it as being a government that's there to enact the result of the referendum, even though the vast majority of its members don't want to. Is that a model for stable governance?
On that point?
I give away.
I think the referendum is certainly quite a unique position within the Constitution of the United Kingdom. However, part of David Cameron's mandate and part of his manifesto was to pass a bill in Parliament that would authorise a referendum with the same impact. Surely that's as best a deferral to the popular people's vote than any other in our current system.
I thank the member for his question. I think he's basically arguing that if a party puts in its manifesto that it abrogates the responsibilities of being a parliamentary government, then it's okay to do away with it. Well, actually, I think, no, that's an irresponsible thing to put in a manifesto, but the good thing about general elections is you can get rid of a party that's done something as irresponsible as that. Referenda are merely a tool to bully parliaments into making rash decisions. There is no scrutiny, there are no committees, there is no upper chamber, there are none of the checks and balances that are needed to ensure laws are coherent and that they limit any damage or risk they might bring about. Democracy doesn't mean everyone has a say on every decision. That would be like, okay, let me paint you a picture. We need, as much as it pains me to say it in the presence of Craig Miller, we need doctors. We like doctors, most of them. We depend on doctors. We place our lives in the hands of doctors. No one would argue that we shouldn't. Doctors are extremely important to us. Does that mean that everyone should be a doctor? No. We don't have time to. We need time to do other things that are important. We need time to be firefighters, policemen, butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, in fact everything, more or less, except a lowly president of the Literary and Scientific Society. I'm referring to the one who got us suspended. The member for somewhere up in the northwest, I'll not be any more specific than that. Because of that, we need people who devote their lives to one division of labour, and one such division of labour is governance. Democracy is about deciding the governors, not deciding how they govern. It's putting people in place who you have a reasonable idea of what they're going to do, and you can hold them to account if they don't. But they are there, and their mandate is as themselves, their responsibility, their faculties, their abilities, their experience. It's not just an abstract yes. So that's why I'm arguing we shouldn't have had a first referendum. We shouldn't have a second referendum. We shouldn't have one ever again. We should stick by the principle of representative parliamentary democracy, which works very well for most free and happy countries in the world. We shouldn't sacrifice our, by and large, no thank you, our by and large considered and accountable government on the altar of an abstract philosophical principle. And somehow, after winning the debate, I still had 1.5 minutes left. So actually, bring it on. I give way.
I mean, well, the Cabinet's really a committee of the Privy Council, so the whole spiel of this given this house is an abstract political theory, so is it not rather self-defeating to then reel against abstraction and political theory?
Well, when we remind everyone that the Cabinet is a committee of the Privy Council, then that's putting it in abstract terms. My argument is based on empirically, obviously everything can be described in abstract terms. That doesn't mean it's bad. I am made up of billions of atoms. Does that mean I'm not a person? No, but I don't go around identifying myself as a billion atoms. Yes, the Cabinet's a committee of the Privy Council, but it's also an example of our parliamentary government which has been shown to work over decades. Referenda have not been shown to work. All they have going for them is the abstract principle. I'm afraid so. Right, you can't interrupt anymore because I'm in my final minute. So, I could just stand here awkwardly for the next 30 seconds and eyeball each of you, but I won't.
Thank you, Mr. Finlay, and the House now welcomes the Deputy Prime Minister for the proposition. Sir Jack Armstrong?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's a delight to speak in my first ever literary debate. So I'd like to further discuss the motion that this House would hold a second EU referendum. I will outline the weaknesses of the first referendum held on the 23rd of June and why I believe this justifies another referendum, and I will discuss the terms in which a second referendum should be held, i.e. whether it should be another in-out referendum or one regarding the terms of our departure. The referendum, held on the 23rd of June, was accompanied by a disastrous campaign. It was completely inappropriate for a decision of such importance as the UK's membership of the EU. Unfortunately, both sides, rather than portraying the pros and cons of the European Union, resorted to lying or scaremongering in order to succeed. For example, a key claim from Vote Leave was that Turkey would join the European Union by 2020. Turkey has sought to join the European Union since 1987 and has only fulfilled one out of 35 criteria required to join. And even if Turkey does fulfill all of these 35 criteria, it will still require a unanimous vote from member states. And some, such as Cyprus, who obviously have an issue with Turkey occupying part of their island as they see, would veto such a vote. In other words, there is no chance of Turkey joining the European Union by 2020.
On that point, sir?
Oh yeah, sure.
Any Tom, Dick or Harry who listened to Laura Kunsberg one night for as much as 3 minutes would know that Turkey had no chance of joining the European Union. Don't you think the fact that people didn't seem to go to that effort shows that they should be trusted with an important decision like that in the first place?
No, I would agree with you on that point, but I think the issue was not so much, as most people here would, as you said, understand they wouldn't be able to join, but it was the fact that Vote Leave did put out on many posters. You know, I think they listed 5 countries, one of which was Turkey, and as I said, that's not going to happen for a very long time. The key problem with the June referendum was that to an extent it was treated as more of an election than a referendum, where both sides presented the public with pledges they would carry out in the case of victory. The most infamous of these was Vote Leave's claim, and I quote on their bus, "We send the EU £350 million a week Let's spend it in our NHS instead. Ignoring the fact that this statistic is not true, as it does not include the rebate, it is not up to campaigners to decide what should be done following the referendum. We have seen more of this following the referendum, with Nigel Farage saying, amongst other things, that people had voted for an Australian-style point system and complete removal from the single market. This is not the case, as a referendum, as the previous speaker pointed out, is on a single issue. It's not an election where, many things can be discussed. Therefore, the referendum should have been, both sides should have put forward the pros and cons of the European Union as opposed to various other issues.
On that point?
Yep.
So it should never been a referendum. You've agreed entirely with this point. So why does this equate to we should have another referendum?
Well, I just don't, it's not so much I disagree with having a referendum, I just don't feel the first referendum was carried out in the right process, so that's why I feel it should be another referendum which is fair, which is a point I'll be getting onto in a second. So having a second referendum with the same questions as the first would allow the UK government to seek reforms of the European Union that they are dissatisfied with, on the basis that we, the British people, have already given our verdict on the EU as it currently stands. If the EU proves to be flexible, as the previous proposition speaker pointed out, it was of Denmark and Ireland of course, then it may be possible that many, if they get substantial reforms, that many Leave voters would perhaps opt to remain. In order to avoid the predicaments of the first referendum, which I mentioned earlier, there would need to be an impartial organisation that would ensure that campaigns on each side, which receive public funding from us, should only be giving facts and not lies or false promises. There is also an argument for holding a second referendum on the terms of the UK's exit and what the future relationship between the UK and the EU would be like. This is because the UK and EU relationship is far too complicated to be decided on a single occasion. One idea for a referendum would be that the government presents its post-Brexit plan to the electorate prior to initiating Article 50 in order to have the approval of the British people in conducting negotiations. However, this would seem unlikely, with the current government refusing to discuss any negotiations. Therefore, I would suggest that a referendum be held near the end of the 2-year negotiation period on what the post-Brexit relationship between the UK and the EU will be. This would give the British and European negotiators time to make what they feel would be the best outcome and then face approval from the electorate. And if the result was a rejection of the deal, then Article 50 would provide for negotiation.
If a government had a referendum on the terms of exit, would that not force the government to put them in a place where they're forced to kind of be bargained by the Eurocrats that want them to force them to a corner which they can't get out of, given us a bad deal?
I do see the point, but I feel at the same time that it is such an important issue that, it should be put to the people, even if they could have an election, and Theresa May could say, alright, if I win this election, this is what, because there are so many different options, you for example, we could go for the Norway option, the European Economic Area, we could go for, as the previous proposition speaker said, a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit, so none of us have any idea, and that's why I feel there should be some sort of legitimacy, which I believe would be best achieved by a referendum. So, as I was saying, and if the result was a rejection of the deal, then Article 50 would provide for negotiations to be extended, subject to the unanimous approval of Member States, and the process could be repeated until a suitable deal is found for both sides. So to conclude, holding a second referendum would allow for a more fair and impartial campaign if it was to be a repeat of the June referendum, which would therefore be more representative of the British electorate, or it would give, if it was on the terms of Brexit, it would give the electorate further say over the terms of Britain's departure from the EU, therefore it would be a more democratic exercise as opposed to less. Thanks very much.
Can we just give Mr. Armstrong another round of applause for our meetings? The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Ryan Neal.
Behold my notes. Okay. Ladies, gentlemen, and other configurations of being, welcome to my take on why we should oppose the motion of holding a second referendum. Now, my take on this is going to be quite different to what you guys have done. You're talking about how Brexit is going to be achieved and other sorts of things like that. I'm talking about the legalities of it, the actual practical, pragmatic process of how we can actually create a second referendum and what would actually legally justify it. So, on that note, I guess, legally, a second referendum can be justified, right, on the specific criteria that there is clear evidence of a significant change, right, careful wording, and a significant change in the electorate or in circumstances, right, a significant change in the electorate or circumstances. Okay. In that case, the example that they gave was a general election, right, where the largest party had a majority of seats, and their policies were primarily on the point of remaining and not activating Article 50 and generally going forward with that. And in that would demonstrate quite clearly that there was a significant change in the electorate. So is that the case? Well, no, I don't believe so. Can that be the case? Can there be a general election where there's a majority? It's possible. Not yet. It's possible, but I don't believe it's plausible, and here's my reasoning why. See, the biggest opposition to what Nicola Sturgeon would call the Brexit party, being the Conservative Party as it is Labour. And if we take even a sideways glance at Labour these days, well, they're not exactly a cohesive, unified force, are they, in any sense. It needs to be understood. Sure.
You're the opposition, you just said that the opposition isn't bigger than the...
I disagree. But at any rate, government, actual government, not this thing that we call it here, actual legitimate government opposition, which would be Labour, which clearly is not a cohesive force. They are putting out their own internal fire, right? They're putting out their fires, they have civil war, not least because of the leadership campaign in the fight for leadership of Corbyn. The backbenchers in terms of playwright right-wingers in their ranks has been a nightmare.
Playwrights aren't right-wingers.
In comparison to Labour, yeah, they are. New Labour is pretty right, let's be honest. Anyway, the point that's being made here anyway is that reasonably, by any logical interpretation or rational understanding of this, they are not capable of giving the gravitas of bringing together even a conceivable coalition against the Conservative government. If they were to hold a general election, more likely than not, the Conservatives would win. Yes?
So what you're saying is, because of other problems in the Labour Party, you think there hasn't been a swing towards supporting Remain?
No, what I'm saying is that in order to have clear evidence in the case that it is provided by legal experts, they would need to have a party that had a majority to show that. And what I'm saying is that the Labour Party is not capable of presenting that majority. Now, why do I say that? Well, the evidence is quite clear from what the first referendum showed. How involved was Labour in that referendum? Let's be honest, in the Remain campaign, barely. Corbyn was more interested in what was the seeds of the absolute nightmare that is his leadership at the moment. If it was bad then and they weren't engaging then, what makes you think they won't engage now? I'm talking more about practicalities rather than the ideology that's been discussed thus far. So in that sense, it's unlikely that they'll have the gravity to pull together the independents, the Greens and all the rest of the Lib Dems to actually justify and get a majority against the Conservatives currently so that they can show clear evidence of that, according to procedure as is the legal definition. So, is that the end of it? Well, no. I'm not going to say that it's impossible to turn around Brexit. For use people who are dead set on undermining Brexit by any means, you do have an option, even if it is completely devoid of integrity and against the democratic people. Looking at you, Chris Pratt. But yeah, you can do so through legislation. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, when Britain joined the European Union in the first place, or the EC as it was, then they put it into legislation through an Act of Parliament, which is the 1973 European Union Act. Right, now, the UK Constitution, in abstract, and we're going to make it abstract because the UK Constitution is a mess, but essentially, legislation can only be legislation. So why is this important? Well, this means that Theresa May cannot activate Article 50 without an Act of Parliament. because she will be using what's called an executive power of royal prerogative, which cannot override or void legislation. So it needs to be brought to Parliament in order to be passed on to the executives, in which case then they will implement Article 50. So you could theoretically undermine Brexit by getting your parliamentary representatives to vote against it. That is your most likely, probably most effective method at this point. A second referendum is not, because whether you want it or not, the fact remains is that you can't legally justify it, which means even if you bring the debate into Parliament, into Westminster, which has happened with this, I think it was Facebook petition, something to do with bringing the debate into Parliament and asking for a second European referendum. It was an action out of sheer emotional trauma at the shock of the result, let's be honest. All that's going to do is bring the very same questions into Westminster and they'll be dismissed. The exact same. It is as simple, well, it's not as simple as that, but generally speaking, it is quite easy to understand. So, in conclusion, I guess, I'm guessing we're going to end a little bit early here. I think, yeah, but generally speaking, your more effective choice is to go the parliamentary route and to undermine legislation there. It's completely undemocratic, it's completely without integrity, but it is possible. Past that second referendum won't do that for you, because let's be honest, any number that is small enough to be plausible in the swing is not going to be large enough to justify that majority. So what do I mean? If your idea of having second referendums that the majority is large enough, you're not going to have a much larger majority either way, and you can't prove that. So basically it's not going to make a difference. You're just going to have a divide by zero situation of anything that look. You're just going to have referendum after referendum after referendum, and not that they're that valuable in the first place, but they're even more devalued at that. So let's just accept the democratic mandate, do the best we can with it, and understand that, well, whatever I did say.
Chief for the government, Dr. Craig Miller.
Okay. A lot has been said about this referendum being a democratic process. And I'm going to say to you, this is not democracy in any way, shape or form. And that's the first reason why I think we need to have a second referendum. Now, anyone who knows me knows I am the most Europhobic person in this. I despise it. Literally, I would rather no deal than what we've got right now. I would rather no trade than I'd rather be poor and pay more taxes. Okay? I don't pay tax at all. Okay? I hate it. Okay? But I hate what the Leave campaign did for our democratic process in this country even more. Okay? Let me introduce you. I fix broken jaws and cheekbones, okay? If somebody came and saw me and after you break them. After I break them. Pro EU. Now, if somebody comes to me with a broken jaw and I make up a load of consequences, so I say, well, if you break your jaw and I fix it, you might end up blind with heart disease and no leg, right? And then I actually say to you, well, if I don't fix it, or I do fix it, this is the marvellous thing that might end up happening. You might end up looking like Brad Pitt, okay? That is not informed consent. That's a joke. That is what happened with the campaigns from both sides in this referendum. So I'm saying to you in this room, there was no democracy here. This was two people, David Cameron against Boris Johnson, basically having a dick waggling contest, right? Because Bojo wanted to be the next Prime Minister. Bojo deserves to go to jail for what he has done to this country, which is basically get up on platform after platform lying. I do not see how you can stand up here and say, when they stand up and give a pack of lies...
On that point, sir.
No. When they give a pack of lies, how on earth can then the vote be democracy? It's not. It's basically misinformed consent, which by definition is not informed and therefore is not democratic.
On that point.
No. The reality was, the first referendum was an absolute farce, and it has ruined our democracy. It's not enhancing it. By throwing that to the curb, putting people that deserve to be in jail, we're basically reinforcing the point that we have to have honesty in our politics. Yeah, go on.
So you're suggesting that we have a second referendum, then Westminster is suddenly going to become very honest with us?
No. Hold on. I'm moving on to that. I will get on to that in a minute. I'll get on to that in a minute if you're happy, or I can answer that now if you want me to. Okay. So effectively, what we need to think about here is how on earth do you actually stop this joke happening again and again and again and again? Because that's the situation we're in right now. This happens routinely. Every 5 years, people get up there, spout crap, get people to vote, right, and then we're left in the shit. That is what happens. So what I'm saying to you is, before we even start to go down another referendum process, we need to have the sort of political equivalent of the General Medical Council, where if a doctor lies, we get sent there and we get struck off. Okay, that's what needs to happen with politicians. There needs to be an authoritarian body that basically goes, no, you can't stand up, no, you can't lie, and you are now struck off. And if it's so bad, you're going to jail. That to me is where Boris Johnson belongs, and I say that as a Tory, a proud one.
We not already have that.
Do we?
Facilities in the media.
Okay, so
every single lie that was put towards people was called out by the media.
The problem is with what happened with this referendum was that there was so much ingrained distrust towards everybody that it didn't really matter what the media were saying. So although George Osborne got up and went, you're going to be £5,200 poorer, which hasn't happened and probably won't because we will be richer, and then various other lies that were said by Boris Johnson about £350 million into the NHS that should be privatised. The reality is that the media have not done the job that they were meant to do because they can't do it, they're not powerful enough. So we need to have an actual body which says to these people, just like it does accountants, doctors, lawyers, dentists, if you lie, you're going to be struck off. Or, at worst, you're going to go to jail. And until we get that in place, we can't have a second referendum. Okay, so does that...
Yes. Yeah. I speak very passionately about the democratic process, but it's not the right of free expression for all our politicians not necessary for the democratic process.
Okay, so I agree with you that we do need to have free speech, okay? That's not something I disagree with at all here. But there's a difference between free speech and lying, okay? And if you're a politician and you're basically paid by us as the taxpayer, your job is to take a load of data, to analyse the data, and to tell us what the data says. That's your job. Now, you might do what Jeremy Hunt's done and misrepresent the data because he's not intelligent enough to understand weekend death rates, right? Or you might have what Bojo done is just straight up lie. Okay, and if you straight up lied, that's basically negligence. Okay, and as such, he needs to go to jail for the job that he has done. It's that bad. Okay, so we're getting on to the point now, sort of an extension from your point here about what would a second referendum entail? Okay, and I think the second referendum should basically entail whether or not we go for a light or a hard Brexit. Now, I want a really, really hard one. I don't want no sort of foreplay with the EU, right? I don't want to be standing there, like, literally going, let's basically you be our friend. I don't like them, okay? I think, literally, the EU are trying to screw over every small business that they can possibly screw over. It's basically a corporate takeover of Europe led by the Germans. The Germans. I want to get out of that thing as hard as physically possible right now, okay? But I do not believe in any way, shape or form that referendum that we just had is any validation for that to occur. There was no democracy there. It was an absolute farce, and as such we have to have a second referendum, regardless of what my own views actually are.
That excitable speech.
I know how your voice goes high when you say proud Tory.
Welcome to Sophie Stratford, Chief Whip for the opposition.
Okay, first of all, I would just like to say thank you very much for having me back. It was very nice. It was very nice to get on a life membership card. I even got a compliment from Craig, so I'm having a very good night. I don't know about the rest of you, but honestly, by this point, I would like to be at the bar, so I'm going to keep this quite short and quite sweet. So, to start with, I would like to start with some refutation, and I'd also like to address the point that Harry made earlier. So Harry, you said, at least I believe what I took from your point was that we should give this referendum to the popular vote because David Cameron laid that out in his political manifesto that he would hold a referendum. We've done that. People said no. We want to leave. So then, why would we do it again? They've carried out the means of that referendum, and honestly, I thought your point really just aided us rather than helping the other team. Moving on to that, I would also like to say that, at least from my perspective, there's been quite a lot of a lack of definition from the proposition. I feel like we've been put forward with three very different points of view. And some of that obviously is about what we would actually do with a second referendum and how we would put that forward. I know there's been some points about how we shouldn't let campaigners try to define the terms of the referendum and try to define the terms of what would happen later. But the fact is we live in a very connected world. And yes, you might be able to say to politicians, we don't want things like, we'll have an extra £350 million a week. But you cannot stop people on Twitter, you cannot stop people on Facebook, you cannot stop people in the world from making those assumptions and from having them heard. That's just the type of world that we live in. I'll take it in a few minutes. So.
Yeah, that's fine.
The other thing I would like to say is Craig's point about Boris Johnson. He clearly hasn't lost and he clearly does need to go to jail, but I don't think a second EU referendum is really the way to do that at all, and I don't think that Craig argued that either. I think that Craig argued for something else entirely and maybe undermined the motion of the debate. So, to move on to hopefully what is actually going to be my main point of the evening, which is indeed why should we? We've already heard from Mr. Finlay, why should we have referendums at all? You've already heard from Mr. Neil, the legalities, I'm so sorry, the legalities of the fact that we can't have a second referendum. And so I'd like to address why? Now, I voted to remain, I was very proud to vote to remain, and I'm sad that we decided to leave. But that's how the people voted. We put it to the popular majority, we went to, don't make faces at me, Mr. Murphy. We put it to a democratic vote, and people said no. Now, I know that, no, I'm not actually moving. I'm really tired today. So, one of the best quotes I read about why we shouldn't have a second referendum is that it really goes against the ideals of the Remain campaign. To say, yes, we're not happy with this, let's have a second vote is, in the words of The Independent, not the best response, but in fact the worst loser response. It is the response of people who aren't happy and want to make a fuss.
On that point?
Yes, go for it.
In Northern Ireland, the majority will vote for Remain, and given that we border an EU country, that puts us in a very different position than the rest of the UK. Is it fair that we be subjected to a Brexit despite us having a separate will than England and Wales and other areas which would enjoy Remain?
Okay, I think that's a very fair point. I think that's a very fair point, and I would agree with you that yes, we should be able to have an input, but I don't see how having a second referendum that may not change the outcome would help us do that. What we need to do instead is ensure that the people who represent us in the negotiations and the people who represent Northern Ireland in those negotiations stand up for us and ensure that we do get a fair deal. And then when we leave, it doesn't affect us in such a way that would be negative towards us. So based on that, I don't see how holding a second referendum would in fact change that vote. I know that as well, Mr. Neil mentioned the e-petition. Now, the e-petition has already been debated by Parliament. Parliament said no. And this leads me on to what really, for me, is the main point of why we shouldn't have a second EU referendum, and really, to me, undermines the motion. We know that under our current government, it just simply will not happen. Theresa May has said it won't happen. Parliament has said it will not happen. The Foreign Office, and I know that they're led by Boris Johnson now, but the Foreign Office have said it will not happen. We know that it won't. And to say now, a mere few months after the referendum, before we've had a new general election, before we have a new government with a very clear mandate, to say yes, we should go, we should completely redo this, will just bring more divide, it will bring more Labour elections probably, and just completely continue to undermine the system. So, to finish up, because I've really lost the thread of where I was going with this, today, the opposition have told you why, frankly, referendums just do not work, therefore we shouldn't have a second one. Why there are no legal basis in place for a second EU referendum, and therefore we should continue to not have one. And also why, frankly, it would just undermine everything that we stand for at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Sturtful. And we will now go to questions from the floor. I think we'll do 4 rounds of questions for proposition, opposition, and abstention points on the motion. So if you'd like to make a point, to stand up, address it towards whatever side you'd like to, or if you just stand out a point on the wording of the motion itself, or whether you thought there was something deficient in the arguments of both sides, stand up, state your name so that Mr. Whitehurst here can record your name in the minutes. And get your point. Try and keep it brief. Sorry. So if anyone has a question for the proposition, please raise your hand. Yes, Mr. Rizzi.
That's the proposition. So what exactly do you seek to gain out of it? So let's say you have a second referendum. If we vote to leave again, we vote to leave. If we vote to remain, your lot have now created an environment where we kill Polish people for speaking Polish, we kill MPs for being MPs. As you know very well, Mr. Miller, there's been like a 400% rise in hate crimes. So let's say the vote goes the opposite way and then we remain. You'll create us a civil war. So what exactly do you want?
Okay.
Out of a second referendum?
I want a referendum on how hard the Brexit is. Okay, I think if we had a very soft Brexit into the European Economic Area, where effectively, rather than staying in the EU with a seat at the table and an opinion, and we go into the EEA, absolutely nothing will change to anybody in the UK. That's not what I want, but at least that would be a very, very happy compromise for virtually the entire country. Versus a hard Brexit where we actually do stop free movement of people. We're not sort of tied in with the EU, and we can start formulating our own trade deals across the world. So I wouldn't be putting another referendum that was in out. It would basically be hard soft. Okay, and that to me doesn't create the problem that you're talking about. It effectively gives people a voice going, look, this is going to be the actual consequences of a hard Brexit. No free movement of people, will probably be poorer for the next 10 years. Okay, that's what a hard Brexit would entail. A soft Brexit going into the EEA, basically you're going to have free movement of people and you're probably not going to be poorer, but you might not end up richer 10 years down the line. And I think if that's the debate, you're not creating a problem. You're actually giving people a valid sort of question for them to answer with known outcomes. Okay, and that's what I would be putting forward post putting together an actual body that says make sure that politicians don't lie.
Right, thank you for that, Dr. Miller. Would the opposition like to respond to that?
I would love to respond. Yeah, that was absolutely irrelevant to the motion. You haven't said that we need a second referendum in the sense of disregarding the first. You're saying we should accept the first and have a second to reaffirm the first. So your arguments undermine the first in the first place have undermined yourself by extension. Can I respond to that?
Not really a back and forth.
Should have gone right first then.
Thank you. Any questions for the opposition? Yes, Mr. Scott.
On Rand's point of there being no significant sign of change in the opinion of the electorate, unlike Mr. David Cameron or our own cosy situation with the Good Friday Agreement, well-run referendum do not solely end up being deployed because we know what way they're going to end. What has happened is a significant, as Mr. Hanna said, a significant change in the circumstances surrounding a potential referendum. And that is the reason I give that we should hold a second referendum.
I'll take that as just me. Yeah, okay. In terms of circumstances around the referendum, in terms of change, okay, well, let's talk about circumstances. If we're talking about the, I've already covered the majority being too small. It was already put to a point by David Cameron that even if it was 1% in either way, it would be binding. So if that were an issue, you should have made that before the vote rather than after when it didn't come in your favour. Also on that point, quite similar to that, I believe. Think about your other point. What points of his were you talking about in particular? Because I kind of need a bit more focus in order to actually give a proper.
There's been a substantive change.
Yes, you've said that, but that is purely abstract. You haven't just. I'm clarifying the question. You haven't said how that was substantive or what was substantive about it, because I have yet to see it. Legal authorities have yet to see it, and that's the reality. You know what I mean? There hasn't been a significant change. The example that they gave was quite particular, yes, but it did show the kind of significance we're talking about. It was a general election with a majority party with the majority seats had as one of their primary policies manifesto to be for remaining. That simply hasn't happened. We haven't held general elections, too soon to say. We should wait till after that before we make any decision, but it's highly unlikely that decision will be made anyway, so I'm still going to oppose that.
Thank you for that. Would anyone from the opposition like to respond?
So, I mean, I'm going to refer to part of your speech, which is that, there are multiple mechanisms. What you talked about, having new government coming in, that's only one of them. The other, which Mr. Spratt was brought up, thank you very much, Mr. Spratt, was about a significant change in circumstances. And actually, that probably has happened because now we know that the government want to go for a no free movement of people, but also a single market access. And if single market access is the main thing, they're saying free movement of people. You need that. It's non-negotiable. Germany and France have said that. Like the two biggest countries there have said it. It's non-negotiable. That's a significant change in circumstances because if you voted leave, then you're not going to get the restrictions of immigration that you want. And because the vote was so close, that means it only takes a small amount of those people to actually change their minds, and a lot of people voted on that basis. So basically, people didn't actually know because nobody knew. And that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hart. Any general questions on an abstention on the motion? Mr. Gallagher?
Okay, as someone who will remain an EU citizen regardless of what happens, I find it ironic that there's actually more love for the European Union coming from this side than that side. Because, like the repeated Lisbon Treaty sent shockwaves through the EU, can you imagine the impact that a second Brexit referendum will have in the EU? The EU is already viewed as an undemocratic and inescapable institution by people within Europe, and the view that that a second Brexit referendum would surely just reinforce that view, and there may not be a an EU to argue over in the future.
Anyone from the opposition like to respond?
I see that as a really good thing. The worse the EU is seen, the better. The more unstable the EU, the better.
That was more aimed towards.
Oh, I agree, yeah, but I just want to say that literally the more we can do in the UK to make the EU worse, the better. Right? Because we get a better deal. Right? We can then basically go, no, we're the big boys in Europe, you're nothing. Right? Look at us, we can just have another referendum, screw you up even further, and then we can get whatever trade deal we want. Right? So the bottom line is that is a great thing, and yet something I forgot to mention, that having a second EU referendum will destabilise the EU even further. Thank you very much for helping my side.
The proposition's already sorry.
I was going to make kind of the argument.
The opposition would like to respond to that.
You responded to the last two. Go ahead, Thank you. It became a bit of a trope during the campaign from the tedious Remain side, and I say that as someone who voted Remain, to say, oh, the EU isn't perfect, but ... I'm going to flip that on its head and say the EU isn't perfect. It occasionally has silly dalliances with things like referenda, but as seen particularly in the case of the Republic of Ireland, it recognises that referenda usually aren't actually that good an idea because sometimes people don't think about it properly and you have to hold another one that's sort of an anti-referendum. The good thing about the EU is that what it does have is a lot of checks and balances, and it has a lot of processes that laws have to go through, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of you might call them anti-democratic, but they are at least not purely democratic. They are levels of democracy. People talk about the European Commission being appointed. Yeah, it's appointed, but it's appointed by elected MEPs. People talk about directives not being democratic, but they are democratic. They're passed by the European Parliament, and then they're passed by national parliaments. So, yeah, that kind of makes the point that actually, you suggested that we were arguing in spite of ourselves, but I'm suggesting that actually the EU is more in line with the version of democracy that we were putting forward, where it isn't just
this is what we want, do it. No, this is what we want, take that as a general guide, but then make sure that it's going to work first.
Thank you for that, Mr. Finlay. Does anyone have a question for the proposition again? We'll go back to the proposition. Anyone at all? No? I love the proposition.
Can I do a follow-up question to Greg? So, you're a doctor. Would you then delegate to the public to have to pose their own opinion on what you do as a doctor, someone who spent 7 years or whatever, like kind of built up an amazing amount of experience like yourself, Mr. Mill? Now what you're asking is that we then vote on the specifics, things which are areas of expertise for both diplomats and both economists, people who have to strategize on the behalf of the country, and you want to delegate that out to every random person who doesn't know anything about the background workings and what actually are the machinery and the cogs that move forward.
Cool, great question. Have you ever looked at the sort of construction of the General Dental Council or the General Medical Council when you come to a fitness to practice trial? No. Basically, there's one doctor and 2 lay people on every single panel. So it's already done. The lay people are already the ones making the decisions. Right, and that happens at sort of that level of when there is negligence that's been taken place at the General Dental Council, General Medical Council, and in the Accountancy Board. So it occurs already in the places that I've got up there and said we need to have in politics. The people decide what happens. It's not always down to the specialist. Okay, that is what happens. Now.
Would anyone from the opposition like to respond?
Well, I'll stick with the general theme and I'll respond directly to you then. Okay, so you're... So anyway, yeah. So you were talking about how we should have the second referendum, right, to destabilise Europe and stuff like that there, and that's so by, yeah, by proxy, to show, yeah, you know, we're the big boys, we're the ones in power. Well, it's the complete opposite. Indecisiveness is weakness. Not being able to make your mind up, not being able to have a backbone, a spine, and having a robust response and plan is not strength by any metric. It is complete and utter incompetence and weakness, and we've seen enough of that thus far. We need to start taking a strong approach to this, and I don't think having second referendums and third referendums and whatever other referendums you want to have, and maybe I'll granny down the street will have her pitch in. We need to have a proper government response now. So second referendum is not a sign of strength, it is a sign of profound weakness.
Thank you for that, Mr. Neil. Questions to the opposition then? I'll take your quote.
It's you spoke there about weakness. Yes. David Cameron's government was elected by the first past the post system, which creates results which are wildly inconsistent with what the population actually wants. This referendum was won through promises that were all broken, many, many lies, and this very, very vague result is now being carried through by a Prime Minister we didn't elect. You're saying that's not something that deserves to be put to the people?
You just state your name for the...
Hugh Dobbin.
Yeah. Yeah. If you want, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I so much to address that. I know it was a point being made to Mr. Neil, but just, I wanted the chance to talk about first class. But yes, it does produce governments that are widely out of step with what people want. And sometimes when people do something silly, like wanting to leave the European Union, that's maybe not such a bad thing. The point about governments produced by first past the post is that they might be unrepresentative, but they're not weak. They have a degree of representation. They represent the general mood in the country to the extent to the 2 old men from the Muppets in the corner over there, to the extent that their performance can cause them to be unelected. Substantial changes in public opinion can lead to the replacement of the government. But they are not democratic to the extent, such as our own in Northern Ireland, where they just cannot function because there are so many competing interests. When you have 2 parties that have more or less equal mandates, that can't even agree on what the name of the country is. That's what happens. That's what happens when you have proportional representation. That's also what happens when you have but through a different mechanism when you have a referendum. You know, first past the post is called first for a reason.
Anyone for the proposition?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Oh, thanks. Yeah, just on your point, I do think first past post is a completely flawed system. You know, we've got a government that was elected on, I think, 36% of the vote, probably even less than that, but I think you're right, and now we've got a Prime Minister who's never stood for election, so I think in those circumstances, it's absolutely essential that we have the second referendum, probably on the basis that, you know, if you had them for Article 50, then at least Theresa May would just probably get re-elected because of Labour state and say, alright, I have my mandate, we have a majority, much bigger majority, let's do this. Or indeed the same, we do the same after, or towards the end of the 2-year negotiation period. So I think it's wrong for a government that is, you know, has such a small majority and a leader who's never stood for election. That would be wrong for her to say, alright, this will be our negotiating period, this will be our terms of negotiation, and, you know, we will have no say in that for another 4 years. So. Yep.
Thank you for that, Mr. Armstrong. Points of abstention now again. Sorry, yes. Yourself, sir, if you could just state your name for it.
Robert Clark. This is just a mistake that I think both sides have made. The plural of referendum is referenda. It's Latin. Like, yeah.
Well, this is an interesting point actually. I have been using referenda because that's just who I am. But I saw something the other day that was quite interesting that suggested that referenda might have, well, first things first, referendum, as we are using it, is an English word, so you can apply just English plural conventions to it. Sorry, I talked to the wrong person. You can't just apply English plural conventions to it, like you can't say octopuses. You don't have to say octopodes, which is apparently the correct version of it. It's definitely not octopi. You should watch QI once in a while. Or give it its proper name, quotes. But it was something like referendum was originally an abbreviation for something. So referenda technically means one referendum on multiple issues, because it's multiple things that are being referred to the people. So if the House decides to demand my apology for using referenda tonight, then I will happily give way to the mistress of Latin.
Shall we go to a vote on that?
Referendums is the more acceptable usage.
According to her.
And the BBC.
All in favour of demanding an apology for Mr. Finlay for his
Do you not need it
pronunciation of the Latin language. Say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
That was a resounding aye.
I think. Yeah.
All opposed say nay.
Nay.
And like, if you really don't care, just say nay.
No. I voted
I
twice.
think the nays might. Your opinion doesn't matter.
So I should neither apologise nor not apologise.
Just remain indifferent to whether you apologise or not. I'd like to thank to the merry way of Latin grammar. A scenic route. Thank you very much. One more question to the proposition, I think. Anyone have a question to the proposition? No more questions?
Seconded.
There are no more questions.
Motion to pass. Seconded.
Yes,
Motion to second by.
In that case, we'll move to a vote.
Yeah.
Anyone else? We'll move to a vote. All in favour of the motion, raise your hand.
Are we doing on speak up performance or personal opinion?
Oh yes, we'll do first vote, your actual opinion on the motion, and then the second vote we'll do
Before your
speaking performance. Before you, well, we should have taken that before they arrived.
But they weren't here before. Yeah, exactly.
Ask me the question.
Yeah.
So, okay, so opinion before the motion, before you heard the speeches tonight, raise your hands.
What is
This House would hold a second EU referendum. If your opinion before tonight was aye, say, raise your hand and say aye. Two there, three, four. If your opinion before the debate tonight was opposed, say nay, raise your hand. Nay.
Is this an existential crisis? Well, you are, and you I've persuaded myself.
How many?
One. Put your hand on. Opinion after the debate then. This is for this has all been basically Speaker's performance of who you thought tonight spoke best, made the most persuasive argument for the side. Thought it was the proposition, raise your hand and say aye. If you thought it was the opposition, raise your hand and say nay. If you thought they both spoke really diabolically badly or ridiculously well, say meh and raise your hand for that. So yes, all in favour of the proposition, raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
Like voting is such a bad idea, guys. I demand a second vote.
Opposition, raise your hands and say nay.
Yeah, it's just like we're the negatives here. Bad vibes.
Why no?
I'm here with my team.
Is that even up to you?
If you thought each side spoke equally well or equally badly, please raise your hand and say meh. In terms of both previous opinion and after opinion and opinion on the motion in general, the opposition have it. And now we're going to retire. Shh! Throw the bell at you.
He's the one that wants it hard.
Sorry. Mr. Winters has been kicking me under the table, such as his thirst for fine port curriculum. I believe that you used an expletive in the midst of your speech, which is worthy of a fine. Raise your hand.
The rules were changed last year by MLS.
What?
About swearing was allowed. She changed them
Yes.
about debate number 6, about mid-February last year. I am 100% right, and you can go back through the minutes before you find me.
Is that
MLS changed the rules.
I move that Whitehurst does not get to leave until he's checked the minutes.
MLS changed the rules.
I believe it went to private member's business and we perhaps had a non-binding vote in the House. I will go through the minutes for next week and we will determine if you have to pay your fine.
Well, I will take that to the highest possible level.
We defer the subject of this doctor curriculum fine until next week. If you'd like to please follow, I'm just going to annoy you by saying, if you'd like to follow this Lily Feather, nice bar.
You can follow her to her house and then have a...
No
If you'd also like to sign up as
follow her to her house
by all means, talk to myself or my secretary, Mr. Will Whitehurst. at any point during the evening, preferably before we go to the bar, because he doesn't really want to sign anything off when he's on the flight.
What benefits come with membership then?
Membership. You get to see Rob every week and me every week. To be honest, that's 50-50, whichever way you look at it. There are many benefits of that. You get to vote in the official votes that happen each week. Your membership card counts the vote towards the official vote. In the vote on the actual casting vote. You also get to compete for the society in various competitions and stuff like that. Come to our Christmas dinner and summer conversatione, which is a really posh word for Christmas dinner times 2 in the summer. And workshops, etc. Workshops which we will be having several of this semester and next.
And
emails, yeah, you get an email as well. So, yeah, update email.
We'll be at the Freshers Fair if you want to come find us.
For tonight,
I won't be because I'm banned. By then.
Hey,
to the house bar.
What's that?